Welcome to our last session on day one of our 10th Streaming Media Connect. And of course, now is the time that my dogs have decided it's barking time. So I apologize in advance for any background noise. Thrilled to be back here virtually, but we'll be back in person in Boston for Streaming Media East in May, the Content Delivery Summit and Streaming Media University workshops on May 17th, and then Streaming Media East proper on May 18th and 19th. So the websites are live. The programs will be live momentarily. Check it out. Register early to get the best prices. I'm Eric Schumacher Rasmussen. I am the conference chair for Streaming Media, as well as the chief marketing officer for Ideas. Before we jump in, a couple of housekeeping notes. Remember the tunes you heard at the beginning of each of these sessions? First person to guess them wins an Amazon gift card, but you must be present to win. And we'll announce it at the end. So we've got a winner, but he's got to stick around. We'll announce that winner at the end of this session. And also, you can only win once this week. So once you win, don't spoil it for anybody else, please. If you have questions for our panel, please enter them in the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen rather than in the chat. That makes it easier for me and our moderators to keep track of them. And if you want live captions turned off, if indeed you're seeing them on your screen, you can go to the bottom of your screen, click on Show Captions or Live Transcript, and click Disable Transcript, and that takes care of it. Finally, all of the Streaming Media Connect sessions will be available on demand starting next week. Steve will pop a link in the chat telling you where to go, or you can always go to streamingmedia.com, click on video, and then click conference videos. I'd like to thank our diamond sponsor, Signiant, and we have a brief message from them before my dogs get even louder.
Wherever content needs to flow, the Signiant platform can move any size file over any IP network at speeds that can be up to 100 times faster than traditional transfer methods. More than 50,000 businesses use the Signiant platform to send and share files, automate movement of data between systems, exchange content with global partners, and move content to and from the cloud. The Signiant platform gives you the power to operate at the speed you need to run your business.
Thanks again to Signiant, and the topic for this next hour is how to do virtual and hybrid events right. And I'm pretty sure one of the top guidelines is don't let your dogs in the room when you're on camera. So without any further ado, I'm going to get off camera and off mic and hand things over to our moderator, Chris Pfaff. Chris, welcome.
Well, thank you, Eric. And as the old cliche goes, it's really difficult to follow dogs or kids. So dogs and Eric Schumacher Rasmussen combined is a tough act to follow. Thank you, Eric and Steve and everybody again. Yes, how to do virtual and hybrid events right. If you want to know the answer to that and a lot of great commentary and insight, we have the panel for you. Three really of the top experts in this field, starting with Dan Houze. Come on in, Dan. He's the VP of Encoding and Digital Strategy for BC Live. He joins us from Puerto Vallarta, Mexico today. So thanks for coming in. And second, we have somebody who's no stranger to this audience here is Alex Lindsay, head of operations at 090 Media. Welcome, Alex.
Thank you.
And last but not least, we have John Porterfield, expert producer, webcast producer from Social 180 Group. And if you're just looking at all this and you're thinking what I'm thinking, yes, that's true. Alex is half the man John is, because 90 is half of 180, at least arithmetically anyway. But most of these chaps have worked together before. And we were saying before we came on that it wasn't really that many years ago before events that were, let's say, not in person, were really audio only. I really feel like a year or two before the pandemic, we started to migrate to video platforms, and Zoom was a part of that. But we've come very far, very fast. And of course, you know, one of the things that we like to talk about quite a bit is quality of experience. And, you know, I think for any event that you're talking about, whether it's a corporate event, it could be a concert, that's a huge issue. So I really want, you know, to start with that as a topic, because when we're all involved in these events, I think we're very forgiving. But you know, scale is such a huge part of this. I mean, Alex, what's your take on how far we've come in terms of really getting that quality experience and that scale right?
I think we're starting to get there. Like, I think we're sliding backwards a little bit. We start to, now people want to come back into the room, and I think that the ways that we're coming back into the room have been sliding us back into the 2015, 2016 range. I think that, one of the things that, I've been doing this a little bit longer than a lot of people that are in it.
Well, we can tell by the gear behind you.
Yeah, exactly. So, but not for necessarily the folks that are here, but for a lot of folks that are getting into this business right now. And, we, 2008, 2009 is when we really started streaming video. And the main thing is that, we aren't doing it that much better now. In some cases, when we go back to physical events, a lot of these events are starting to work. The problem really is that there's data that we have from 10 years ago that really told us that the hybrid events weren't working, and they're still not working. And so, like, I know that we're here to talk about the best.
So as an adjunct, that you're a second class citizen if you're not in the room. So you should be happy that there's a camera that has a terrible angle of five people on a stage. Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, when we started, it made sense. I was streaming, we were streaming Dreamforce, and there's 15,000 people in the room and 300 people watching. You are a second class
and for those who don't know, Dreamforce is Salesforce's Mondo over the top. It's an annual event, right? And
so, but there was a point at some point where that started to shift, where it was equal, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and now really the digital audience is going to take over. And so by making them a second class citizen, we're really putting our events at risk, because the problem it really is that what the data that we see when you don't really build it for the online audience is that they don't feel like they're connected. And when they don't feel like they're connected, they don't feel like the event's important. They don't feel like the product is important. They don't feel like a lot of these things are important. And we don't talk about enough.
Right. So you're saying in some respect, there's a brand disconnect, that you're damaging your brand to some extent.
It's damaging the brand, but more importantly, it's damaging people coming back to another event. Because the thing is that, and it's the most devastating way to do this, because they don't complain. People who complain care about the event, and they want it to be better. People who don't complain oftentimes are just disappearing. Like, they just go, oh, and we've called them and said, we've had people call out and call people and say, hey, why didn't you come? Well, I was just busy. It wasn't like I'm mad that I felt like I was in the back of the room.
I think it may also depend on the user to some extent, but also accessibility. And, Dan, I want you to talk about this. Accessibility is really key, particularly key for that online audience, whether it is a digital first event. I mean, this event that we're doing this week is digital first, but talk about accessibility, because I don't think that gets enough attention in this hybrid event conversation, Dan.
Yeah, sure. I think accessibility, I'm not sure how much it's being used necessarily hybrid. I think what I'm struggling with in this conversation too is, like, when Alex was talking about people coming back or whatnot, let's talk about consumer versus sort of like an internal kind of audience, right? And I think that a lot of times the virtual shows we're doing, or the hybrid shows or digital first shows that we're doing, are sort of just corporate driven, and they're sort of internal meetings, right? A lot of those kind of things. It's not necessarily launching like a keynote for a new product or something like that too, right?
I would only say that it's true, except for the fact that you still have to keep all the employees going the same direction. And so when the thing is that when you create an event where they don't feel important, you're not getting quite the same charge out of your corporate event.
Yeah, and so, corporate events are one part of it. Now, John, you do a lot in esports, which of course is really kind of taken the bar a little higher. And not just because of things like Twitch, but I find that that's also an interesting sort of event space in which to layer different things, whether it's a second screen experience. So talk about how that world has perhaps taught or illuminated the broader audience.
Yeah, no, I think that from an esports, I mean, to Dan's point and to Alec, without jumping in a little bit what they're going back to, I think a lot of it and the second screen experiences, when we talk about that, I talked about that back at Stream Media West and a couple months back. And, the main focus on whether it's esports or some other type of venue is trying to create some kind of elevate the experience and the storytelling of the particular event that might be occurring. And so I think part of the challenge we have is, in developing these virtual events, because people kind of got burned out during in terms of consuming a lot of content for esports or sports venues. I think we need to think about what kind of story we're trying to tell when people connect into the experience. And so how do you create that? Well, there's vendors like Display and Singular and other people out there. And, Alex and Dan know about these guys very well. And so I think there's a point of trying to plan a process by which we can bring that viewership up. I think in esports, especially I've gotten some feedback on, is that one of the challenges they're facing is the people attending and getting their interest, right? And getting them involved. And how do you create that immersive experience? And I think that's a next wave of what we need to really try to define what that looks like as we kind of work.
So that's a good sort of segue. First, I just want to throw out some figures here. There was some interesting numbers that I had pulled that show that the global virtual events market in 2021 was valued at around 114 billion. And now that's estimated by 2027 to be somewhere around 366 billion. And obviously, one of the unsung heroes of all this, and we talked about this a little bit right before the call, is the explosion of broadband usage. And certainly in the United States, our networks were held very well during the pandemic. But do you see these hybrid virtual events, expanding their mission as broadband penetration increases? And I think that part of that question, and this is really what I want us to focus on, is as producers, how much of this and what shall I say freedom do you have in choosing the platform? For example, we're using Zoom, which, I have a Zoom webinar license. I like it very much, but maybe we can start answering that, because I think that sort of is a good way to pivot off of something John just mentioned. So Dan, why don't we start with you on that? What's your take there?
Could you reframe the question for me?
Well, I think in other words, where is the platform, a help or a hindrance, or does it really matter? Because there's so many of them, and some of them are even bespoke, depending on which company and how much money they have.
Of course. Yeah. I mean, different platforms are being used for different things. I think that's the challenge that we're in now is, trying to keep up with all these platforms, trying to figure out who's going to be sticking around for a while, because there's a big investment. There's a big learning curve, for your production folks, for the end users, making sure that it's a good product, making sure also too that those products, interpolate easily between mobile devices, desktop, and where the people are out in the world moving about, right? That end audience that you're trying to go after. So, I mean, there's obviously some heavy players that we tend to lean towards, but at least for our world, a lot of it is determined by the time we get there, right? A lot of times the corporate stuff, education, nonprofits already have a plan in place. And so it's kind of working within that model to help them deliver the best results for their particular event.
Yeah. And Alex, what's your take on that?
I think the problem with most of the platforms is they're throwing the ball to where the receiver not even is, but was a long time ago. So they're trying to reproduce physical events inside of virtual events, and it just doesn't work. And so the thing is that, for instance, when you're doing a purely virtual event, there's no reason to have multiple tracks. You don't have, why are we creating FOMO for all these people to have 8 tracks at the same time? So all these platforms are built around something that we don't need anymore, and so we can have all the smaller events happening over a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and then have the main events, happening in person if we want to. And so the thing is that there's not really any reason why we're doing, there's a story of a family that always cuts the end of the roast off, to put, and then they cook it. And they ask the grandmother, why did you do that? Because everyone was asking, she's like, my pot wasn't big enough. And so the thing is that we made all these rules about physical events or how we do events because of physical events, because we had to get everybody in one place. We didn't have, for thousands of years, we didn't have video. I know it sounds crazy. And so we had to get everybody in one place. And to do that, we might as well talk about a bunch of things all at one time, because they paid for travel and they have a hotel room and they have all those things. And so there's all these constraints of the physical world that we're weighting down our virtual events with, when we get out of that and say, well, we can have an event that happens for 3 months or 2 weeks or whatever it is, and culminate in a physical event or start in a physical event, but it doesn't have to be all there, and when we do that, we can have a lot more people, because the real power is interactivity. When we start interacting with the audience, when you want to see average view time and sequential attendance and all the important numbers, not the useless numbers are kind of like reach and concurrent views and total views and all those silly things. And so the thing is that when you want to talk about like average view time and sequential attendance, what you're talking about is interaction. Like, how do we ask questions? How do we
and
interact
barge
with the
in
audience directly? Yeah.
Now, Dan had a question. Barge in,
Well,
Dan.
not a question, but I love what Alex is saying. And I think it is interesting because I'm thinking back to conferences that I've gone to in person, right? And I'm thinking, oh, wait a second, they never do any interaction at these conferences, right? So I think it's this has
They
been
weren't a good idea back then. Like we've been, I've spoken at a lot of conferences, and I get up and my plan is to speak for 10 minutes and then answer questions. And it has worked for 20 years. It's not, and it works in person. It works, and we tell everyone when we're talking about events is flip that switch and because what happens is you want to get people out of passive listening and into active listening as fast as you can. And the best way to do that is to answer the questions.
And one of the masters at that is Leo Laporte, right? Leo Laporte
I was on a show with Leo earlier today.
I saw that post. Yeah. I mean, he's been great at, he can do a whole show. It's like, Leo, how are you on air 24 hours a day?
Yeah.
And it's driven by the audience, right? And I mean, it's a brilliant way to, conduct your meetings and to really get at what people are wanting and needing.
Yeah. And I think another thing is that we and I think all of you have done this is to see the value of things like multi-city events. I mean, obviously the ability to drop people in from wherever, it's a global industry now, as opposed to just having 50 people in a room in say Chicago or something,
And one of the things that we talk a lot about is separating hybrid events from digital first events. So the way I kind of think of it is digital events. This is a digital event. There's nobody anywhere, Then we have digital first events. Then we have hybrid events. Then we have physical events. And the hybrid events are kind of just like it's a web stream kind of with maybe some added things to it. But the digital first event says the digital audience means more, or at least as important as the physical audience. And when we do that, the one thing that we do is that we take the speakers off the stage. We put them on either a screen or an LED wall, because now the speakers can be present with all of the audiences they have. We can put a bunch of screens in front of them. We can put 8 screens in front of them. We can have this is Cape Town. This is LA. This is New York. We can also bring other speakers in from anywhere in the world, and they're all on even footing with the current speaker, so they all look equal. We can still have return cameras. We can still talk to the people in the main plenary, but that main plenary can be in 8 cities, and all of them have a front row experience. And the watch party in Nigeria has the front row experience.
But that's a great production decision. John, you're talking about what you do in breakout rooms. I mean, what's your experience there? Because I think that I tend to agree with Alex about, multiple rooms and events, but look, I mean, that's from a producer's, point of view. I mean, I think there's breakout rooms and the level of interactivity. I'll be honest. I think that most people haven't evolved to a point where they're really comfortable interacting digitally, but tell us what you've experienced on that, John.
Yeah, so I kind of come at it from 2 different fronts. I come at it from where I was in the house of worship to what we talked about, where we did, the technology's progressed, where we did a major broadcast that everybody was connecting through different Roku devices, Apple TV and things, the way of connecting that and having some kind of local event. And it's one direction. I think the challenge to everybody we're talking about here is and we've had the chat functionality and things like that in the house of worship space, but also in other venues, we see that. And people, and how do we get them to engage, right, and communicate? And I think it goes back to like trying to look at ways to create unique value. One event where I'm working on playing right now is that where, to Alex's point, there may be a set of physical events that occur that lead up to the digital virtual event, right? And so, it kind of builds some momentum a bit, and then you kind of build out the framework by which, okay, here's how we're going to produce the event. And maybe want to bring some other elements in that make it unique and tell the story for a nonprofit that has a very unique message to their audience, but at the same time, they want to build awareness. So I think the challenge is getting them to engage on that one. And I think on the corporate event side or things in breakout rooms, I think that's still a bit of a challenge. How do we create the right message or value that gains the interest? If I went to an AWS event years ago or one of the Summit events, and I sit in the main platform, there's like 3 different venues, and each one had different headphones for different presentations that are occurring. That's great if you're physically there, but how do we take that? And I think that's one of the things I think we need to work on, really trying to help make sure that we help support the clients in doing that. And I know Dan has done a lot of that, and as Alex. And so I think that continues to be a challenge. We need to really kind of understand the value, because the technology from my perspective is there. It's a matter of planning and doing it that I think that we have to really make sure that it brings the right value.
And so Dan, to that point, I mean, you've done some recent work, with the House of Worship, community, which, obviously most of us who've been in this industry a while know, have really practically invented, some of this, and certainly with, the spend that they put, on, AV, and I know you've got a nice Yamaha behind you there, but no, seriously, what is, because we talk about communities of interest and engagement, but I think that, this is a great way to really build, because I've seen it with the events that I've done over time. I think people become much more familiar with being, quote unquote, in the room with people who are wherever the hell they are, and maybe they're people we'll never meet in real life. But what is, how do you build that kind of trust and scale it?
That's a great question. I think being able to have this community before the event and after the event really helps a lot. Having e-blasts, having, group chats, having, whether it's like a subscription series or something like that, right? That can allow sort of that community to grow. Maybe you're asking them questions in advance. We helped with production for Oprah's daily class. She does once a month. And, that's a big part of what those amazing producers do over there is they send out an e-blast, or they send out a questionnaire of 5 questions. And number one, they're polling their audiences to kind of get a sense of what audiences want to talk about. But they're also too, polling certain groups and saying, could we bring this person in, to talk about their experiences, right? And then it helps the audiences kind of connect, and they feel like they're contributing to that process a little bit, I think the other thing I want to add, and what we were talking about earlier, which is allowing these audiences to contribute. We especially in the corporate world, they're very concerned about the message. And, when you're sitting in a room with 100 people of your colleagues, you're not going to yell, unless maybe you're Marjorie Taylor Greene, you're not going to yell out, and just like blast an executive or something, or ask a question maybe that's a little, risque or something. But I think there's moderation. Moderation tools have become really, really important to a lot of the corporate people that we work with, because they want the interactivity, but they still want to control the interactivity, right? And some of those different levels. And I think that there's an interesting dialogue there too, right? To make sure that we keep improving those tools, but allowing people to feel like they're contributing to the process.
Yeah, and I think that that's also sort of an adjunct to what you talked about with accessibility and trying to do, really better job of closed captioning and translation real time. Here's a question which I think gets overlooked sometimes, because we're all in this industry. We're all producing and also obviously consuming both virtual and hybrid and in-person events. Where does social media come into play here? Because it wasn't that long ago where, let's say, Facebook Watch or something you do on Snapchat would have been a way, quote unquote, to do a virtual event. Are you pulling in various elements, let's say for a brand or an entertainment or even house of worship or nonprofit? Are those strands? I mean, John, do you have to take that into mind, whether it's a YouTube channel or it's a Facebook page?
Absolutely, all the time. Well, this is without a doubt, it's consistent. And so I think, it comes out, especially in the house of worship, but even with that nonprofit I was talking about, we did the event last year ago, and with using a cloud-based production where the host was in Nebraska, we brought in and we were streaming live on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook on their feeds. That also allowed the host to take a moment to talk to the audience and say, hey, let's check the social media feeds, because we had somebody running the CG from London that actually happened to be display, and they were learning, and so they're bringing all the elements and feeds in as we're multi-streaming out through like a platform like easelive.io, and there's many others out there that give you ability to support that. So social media without a doubt is consistent there. However, I do think one of some feedback I got recently that we are noticing is from an analytics perspective, and Alex brought this up, is that I think more and more people are looking at the content and housing it on their platform that's unique to them to collect the information, whether you're corporate, nonprofit, whatever, because as you diversify these multi-streams out to the various social media platforms, like the challenge is your analytics starts to get kind of split up in different segments of the market. So the question is like, where's your audience going to be sitting, right? Do you want them on each of those platforms? And I think, Dan and Alex know this as well. So I think analytics is another element of, where do you want that data to sit?
Yeah. And Alex, you go ahead, Alex, because I knew you had something to say about this.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the main thing is that what we really focus on, I mean, the analytics is important right now as we move towards GDPR and a lot of the other restrictions that are happening. A lot of our clients are more and more concerned about PII of even touching it. So, and I think that more consumers are becoming more and more edgy about it. And so we think that, some of that data is going to be harder and harder to come by because they're just not interested in sharing it. And, the corporations actually don't want to get into the business of it. So that makes our content way more important in the event, because we actually have to create a meaningful relationship. We can't manipulate them later. We have to create something that they want to come and see again. And we have to create a meaning that they walk away going, wow, that was great, or whatever that is, because we can't just do something to get leads anymore, because those leads may evaporate over time. I think that one of the things that we think about with social media is we look at which ones make the most sense. A lot of times I don't usually recommend multi-streaming very often. What we do is we use all of those social media to promote different ways of the event. So Instagram is showing you some cool things from the expo, and Twitter is showing you behind the scenes of something, or we might have a discussion ahead of time. Facebook is going to be, we're going to chat afterwards on Facebook, and then YouTube. If we're going to stream to something that's public, we tend to go to YouTube because it's the highest quality stream of all the social networks as far as the video quality. And then we wrap our shows. I do a show every morning talking about this. This is all we talk about in the morning, and we wrap our show with our own Q&A system so that we really can focus on interaction and process, because our Q&A is a lot more robust than what's out there. And so we're able to kind of tie that conversation back, and you definitely see a much more meaningful connection and much longer average view times, and people really having a meaningful connection.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what again, I would expect, because of course, I mean, I use Restream, so I don't know if you guys use that at all. I think that's very effective, and particularly if you're going through, let's say, LinkedIn for a business audience. But yeah, I think that this gets down to the nub of what you're doing for the show. Okay, it's show business at the end of the day. And I think this is a good time to sort of pivot to talking about the entertainment side of this. Dan, I know you've probably done as much, if not more, than our other folks here in terms of entertainment. But it's an interesting thing that we've seen over the years that was, to use Alex's term, kind of like second-class citizen. I mean, and now that tours are back, I think Veeps and others who were doing that for a little while have kind of begged off a little bit, but it never really got there. But talk about what that experience is like, because I find that there's a lot of money left on the table there.
The experience of streaming entertainment content for virtual and hybrid, or
exactly.
I haven't had a lot of experience in that realm. Generally, I think the entertainment acts that we're still working with, even if it's a red carpet and that sort of thing, it's a very passive experience, unfortunately, right? You get some social media kind of interaction, but they're not necessarily setting it up like a big virtual type of event, or you have a band, an act, that's, has a concert series or whatnot, and plug into, obviously a big plug for the keynote, Deadmau5, and that conversation with Eric was amazing. And if anybody hasn't, rewind your VCR, guys, and go check it out. It was a great conversation to see kind of where that whole industry is.
Yeah. One of the things that we see a lot, I mean, I do a fair bit of those types of shows, and the big thing is figuring out how you sell tickets. That's what everyone's figuring out. How do we sell tickets to this? Now you can do some PR. And one of the things that we have found is that the artists that slow down, so for the stuff that especially they're not getting paid for, or things that are part of their Patreon, or things that are doing those as far as entertainment, gets back to exactly what we talked about before, is that interactivity turns out to be it is the holy grail, is how do you talk to them? And so artists who can't play a 2-hour show every Saturday, because if you do that, people have already seen it. You did a show from your house, great, and trying to get them to come every single time is harder.
Yeah.
But if you play a song every half hour and talk about the song and answer questions and interact with your audience, you end up with an audience that's much more likely to come back to the next one, because they're really they were engaged again. They were brought to the front row. We also are seeing more and more shows where we take the audience completely out of the. I'm working on a concert stage right now, and there's no space for the audience. like there's no, the audience.
Yeah, screw them, man. Who needs them?
The audience, the online audience is the audience, right? And
Right.
So the thing is and when you start talking about that kind of conversation, when you start talking about that with bands, the only thing that comes out of their mouth, and I mean to a band, is, when do I get to stop touring? Like, I know that they say that they love to tour, and they tell you how great it is to be here.
It's a great
but they don't.
way
It's
to
money.
make incremental revenue. And I think
It's not
we have
it's not incremental. Like if you get it working, it's way more than the tour, And so that's what they're all looking at. And so all the bands, all the music artists that are out there, this is like an untapped little thing. And as soon as we figure out how they make the kind of money they're making with tours, they'll do 10 or 12 cities.
So there's checkouttogether.com. I had Mark DiLorenzo on a panel we did last year. He's got an amazing roster of musicians who perform live from their studios, and they've got a community of people who ask questions, and it's the number 2 GTHR together. Check it out. And obviously, one of the great gifts of the pandemic was that ain't nobody could go nowhere. So, Richard Thompson, who lives in my town, Montclair, New Jersey, was doing these conversations, and Elvis Costello and Lyle Lovett were doing these things. And one Elvis was interviewing Richard, and Richard's battery ran out on his laptop, and he had to run downstairs, and it showed that he was barefoot and in shorts, and it was hilarious. And that's just priceless. And I think that's the engagement, coming back to what Alex is saying, that we all love. And now we're learning some more tips and tricks. Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, I think, Chris, something that keeps popping back up in my mind, and I'm sorry I stumbled a little earlier in your question, because I kept thinking, a lot of artists we weren't working with directly because they were just doing it themselves, right? And so, like, I think of like David Foster on Instagram, every morning with his new wife, who's an amazing singer, and they're doing Instagram Live. They're bringing in their friends, right? And they're interacting from that, but it's just all from their phone. It's pretty damn good. It's entertaining, and they can bring in, one of David's favorite people, and just, hey, how's it going, Michael Bublé? Did you like that song? Let me try this in a different key. And they did that every day, almost every day of the pandemic. And then it kind of slowed down. But, I see a lot of artists kind of doing those one-on-one kind of experiences, but I would love to see that from a big stage presentation style.
Yeah, and we've done a couple of them from pretty big stages, and they look great. But the funny thing that we find is that we don't know how many cameras we really need, because as you start to do them, you kind of feel like you just want to be there. You want a camera that's kind of framed everybody, and I get to sit there and watch it. What we found is that if I'm on a big screen, like a theater screen, I kind of want to see the whole body. But if I'm at home, I kind of want to see a little lower than waist up. It's like the same size as me. Like I'm looking through a little window, then they're there. And so we play a lot with those camera angles, but we find that that's there. And that what's incredible is, what most people don't know is, like, YouTube Live now does HDR, and does HDR10 and 5.1, to live, and so there's a lot of things that artists a lot of artists can ramp this up to a different level. We're doing a lot of R&D with HDR10 and 5.1 to YouTube right now. And it's,
what do you find?
Only one channel of audio and one channel of captions. Come on, guys. Come on, YouTube.
Yeah, well, that's got to be fixed, because
captions.
That's got to be fixed. So, John, tell us about your tips and tricks, because I want to start getting into this. So we've learned a little bit from Alex. What have you learned in this last 3 years of doing live and virtual and hybrid. And I mean, what's come out the other side? Because we've talked a lot about Ease Live and other vendors that you're using, but I mean, is there any one thing or two things in particular that you've learned in terms of producing these events that you didn't know, before March of 2020?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I was just thinking as Dan and everybody was talking, Alex, I had a lot of things flooding through my brain, talking about, the fan engagement and how do you bring that element into it, right? How do you define what that looks like? And so I work with a lot of people in the streaming media community, and Dan and Alex have done some great stuff, and all of us. And so it's always, I think one of the biggest things is learning from each other as part of the community and defining what that looks like. I think from a content creator or something more formal where you're doing something using a platform that creates a way to, capture, you may not be live, right? But we may be capturing that for distribution on, a variety of different platforms or services out there for a client or whatever it may be. So I think probably there's a lot of things when you ask me that question, I think there's a lot of things that flow through my mind. I've learned a lot in the past 2-3 years, to be honest with you. I think there was a lot of things that, from the type of micro studio setups, things that work well, to audio, to everything. We've all seen that. We've witnessed it in watching in some of the major productions. But I think probably some of the platforms like, Restream, StreamYard, Ecamm and others, and vMix certainly have become very popular to utilize for doing some productions. As we scale that up, then we're seeing more in my world, more of the easelive.io, now part of LiveView, or an Epiphan with Unify or Connect. In different ways, we can take the technology that was probably already there and then incorporate that and define and build out a new level of experience. Right. So for me, I think I kind of have to wear many different hats still. That's okay, because I think that's the beauty of the technology and the media. But for me, it's been, some of the common platforms like Ecamm and others, and you see a lot of that, or vMix in particular. So, but then we just scale up depending on the need of the client.
Yeah. Yeah. And scale obviously is still a huge thing. And now we're going to talk a little bit about telecom here. So 5G, which is, basically most people only know in this industry from live events and, some other cool things, emergency services. But seriously, I mean, it has worked well, certainly at live events. Between that and increasing our broadband penetration and real broadband, I mean, what do you think? I mean, I think that the biggest factor is ensuring that you've got multi-device capabilities. And yeah, I mean, if you are, looking for great throughput, I guess 5G is a thing. But Alex, give us the real story there.
So 5G makes almost no impact on our business.
Right.
So I, and it's like, it is going to, 5G has some efficiencies if you're in a highly dense area where you can put an antenna every 10 feet. And if you do all those things, it's great. But when we talk about, when we get back to talking about real connections and real audiences and real people and everything else, it has no impact. Now, if you can get a guaranteed service from 5G, which some of the providers provide, you can have cameras that are doing 100 megs a second. You can have lots of other things that are backhauling, and we've done some of that work, and it's very effective, to do that. It's not, I don't know how much better it is than just using a live view, but it is, for the camera, except for the late,
which is props to live view. I mean,
yeah, exactly. I mean, we've used live view. I've used live views for 15 years. And so the, the latency is lower, you can theoretically get more bandwidth out of it. You can do all those things. And so there are some advantages to it. There's a lot of back and forth. Have we used it regularly in anything that we've done? Absolutely not. And so the one place that we have seen it is high density areas. So if you're able to do so I've done stuff at some arenas for basketball games, and in that environment we have 900 transmitters or transceivers in the building, and the 5G technology or the Wi-Fi technology, depending on the 5G is a little bit more agile than Wi-Fi, so you're able to kind of move through the system, and everybody in the system is getting 20-30 megs a second, and that is useful for doing things that are in the event. And I think that becomes more interesting when we talk about AR. So as you know, we're not going to talk about that here, but AR and VR get real interesting when I can give you stuff that you need right then to give you directions or additional experiences, et cetera.
Right. And so that's really from my use cases is where AR in the field becomes very compelling and a great use case for 5G. And Dan, go ahead.
Can I, before well, this topic is great, of course, but I also want to go back to tips and tricks at some point, Chris, because I have a couple little things I want to throw in there.
Yes. No, we're kind of done, talking about 5G, but I did want to demystify that just a little bit. And I do think, because we're not going to talk too much about the XR world, but I do want to come back to that in a second. So give us your tips and tricks, Dan, because I know you've got a lot of learning there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, talking about this topic, right, hybrid and virtual production, one of the things that has been a huge plus for us that we tend to forget is to do your best as you would a producer who's backstage, working for a TV show or working for, presenting somebody when they go out on stage, and you want their makeup and everything to look good and present the best. You have to treat that remote person, the remote presenter, in the same way, right? And I think even a little tips and tricks like assigning producers, on a Teams call or a Zoom call to deal specifically with talent presenters, right? Obviously there's, lights and cameras and that sort of thing, but it's going beyond that. It's going kind of what Alex talks about with digital first, right? Is, how many screens do you want to put in front of that remote presenter so they really feel like they're engaged, right? So they can look at the screen and see. I have a nice little story that I'm very proud of, is that we were doing some video production for a major corporation, and the incoming CEO worked with us on a project. And after the project, he called his comms person and said, "That's it. I want those people on every show that I'm doing from now moving forward." And the whole reason is because I gave him an Eagle Eye camera return. Basically, it was just like a little camera, a little Marshall that we stuck up there at the last minute above the main TV screen, to really give him at all times, he could see what the audience was doing, what they were reacting, if they were getting bored, if they were falling asleep. And I'm just, but, thinking about those things, thinking about the experience of the presenter, right? And how does that affect their performance?
Yeah. Well, that's what we used to call the ego cam, or the ego cam, back from CEO days. This is like the dawn of the 21st century.
But we can't forget about that in the virtual.
That's the point. That's the point. That's where the money is.
I think Dan is right. I mean, we spend a lot of time on that, probably more time on that than people talk about platforms. And I'm like, yeah, whatever. Like, what we care about is that the viewer has a great experience and we can interact with them, and that the speakers have a great experience and they can be present. You
still have to run the show. You still have to mix the show, cut the show. We
work on that. Yeah. Right. And so but what we worry about is that we can, that's all for, I mean, I've done 3,000 events. like mixing the show is not something I worry about.
Today? Just today? Oh my God, Alex.
Not today.
Yeah. Man, that's massive. How'd you do that?
But how did you do that? Did you over the last 30 years, I've done a lot. I'm not worried about mixing or cutting the show anymore. Like, we're past that. That part is not like a thing.
I know, we're just giving you the razz. But no, seriously.
But what I was going to say is that, like, when we to build off of what Dan was talking about, is that when someone comes in for our speakers, for instance, our speakers don't sit in the same event like we are here. Those speakers are in another, this is the event, right? And we're going to feed into that event. Speakers come into here, and then they get brought into breakout rooms. So they get dropped in, and they go, well, this is their holding room. This is the hair and makeup, which they go one at a time through. Right. And then we take them to another one, which is the green room. And then we bring them in, or we take them to another breakout room. And then we're using things like Zoom ISO and Zoom OSC to build a show that goes into the event. And those are all things that the platforms try to do, but I have to say that the moment that Zoom ISO and Zoom OSC really hit the surface, completely changed everything about how we build shows, because we now can go in. I have one Mac Mini and take 8 1080p feeds and just stick them into our switcher. And so now we're able to build shows. And the show that I do every morning, if people look at, that's called Office Hours Global. And that show we do every morning is we can take up to 20 outputs out of one Zoom session. We can feed it in. Super sources are generated dynamically based on who's going to answer the questions. Lower thirds, all that stuff is all built with things like Isadora and Universe and Zoom ISO and Zoom OSC, and it's all tied together into a show that gets then delivered to another meeting. And so
Right.
when you start thinking about that, that's when we get back at what platform to use. There's nothing, we're there. Like, as far as we're concerned, being able to produce a show, it's like wherever I can put that window, whether that's YouTube or or Zoom events or Hopin or whatever we want to do. I'm just going to take that show and I'm just going to stick it somewhere.
Yeah.
I'm not trying
but
to use the platform.
that should be understood. But I think that for a lot of people, this is still relatively new. And by the way, we have a pretty good audience out here. We're somewhere around 100 folks, and not one of them has fallen asleep. But we are going to take some questions here. Laura Thompson asks, Alex, you have a quote about when you do physical events, you exclude 99% of your audience. Can you talk more about that, please? And it's important because she may have misquoted you. So please respond to Ms. Thompson.
She quoted me correctly, except for that I say 99.99999% of the audience of the addressable market. So when you do a physical event, there's a huge portion of the world that can't get a visa, can't get a plane, can't get, don't have time, can't get the budget, all those things that aren't coming to your show and listening to what you're doing. When you do a physical only event, you really are cutting out this huge addressable market around the world that you don't have access to. When you make it a hybrid, you just make them less important. So the thing that you want to be thinking about is how do you, build these digital first and digital events, which are going to be, in my opinion, the two big fields coming. The physical events is where we were. The hybrid events are this kind of rickety, poorly designed bridge that goes to the future. And the digital and digital first events are the future, of what we're going to see. And they're going to be powered by a lot of the tools that already exist, again, that we've talked about.
And the one thing, and I will say this to Laura, is that you miss serendipity. Most people have not learned how to network virtually, and you miss the serendipity of.
I'm going to be argumentative here for a second.
Yeah.
So a digital first event totally lets you have all the serendipity you want, except you can have it in 10 cities at one time, and everyone can be rubbing elbows with people. So the digital first event still brings everybody in. They can still have the little hallway conversations and eat the little cookies and get their coffee and all the things that they want to have. And even in a digital event, I mean, within office hours, we have people hanging out 24/7, in Zoom. And so the thing is that those things can happen. And again, when I say digital first and digital events, the digital first event has all the benefits of a hybrid event, except for all you're doing is removing the speakers so that they can be present with everybody. But otherwise, it's a physical event. It's just that it's designed so that when you see the videos and when you see people talking, they're talking to everyone at the same time, the way you and I are talking now, not I'm looking down over here and not really paying attention to you and that type of thing.
Right. So Paul Faleo asks, we've been seeing AI and chatbots make inroads lately in the marketing space and like content and asset generations. How could this technology disrupt events, whether virtual or physical? John, what do you think about that?
I missed the last part of the question again. One more time. Get the last part. Whose question was?
Well, basically, how does generative AI chatbots disrupt events, whether virtual or physical, or do you feel that they don't disrupt? But that's Paul Faleo's question.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a challenge. I mean, the bots. I mean, I don't know. I don't have a lot of expertise on the bot side of it, other than dealing and managing. I mean, I go back to a lot of the stuff I've worked on where we had moderators and watching bots that come in there and trying to block certain ones that were maybe not being very friendly for the audience online. That tends to be more of moderating and keeping a keen eye on what's going on with those bots. But if you have something there that's creating some kind of engagement, I don't know. I mean, that's kind of a big question mark to me, right? How useful are they really going to be? Are they going to really present a lot of more value in terms of generating some conversation? Back to Alex's point, if it's people going to a breakout room, is there something there like, hey, that was a great comment, or some kind of technology that's automating some kind of a feedback system?
Right. No, it's interesting. And here's one from anonymous attendee. I just want to say one. Hold on, we've got one more question. Okay. You've talked enough. Anonymous attendee asks, Dan, do you think concerts might go the same way of hybrid events that we talk about in conferences? How does a performer get the lift from a mass audience? Which is kind of what I was talking about earlier, Dan. But what do you think about anonymous attendee's question?
Yeah, I think that we kind of answered that a little bit already too, right? Alex was saying, he was giving us some great use cases of what they've done with some of their artists, and I think that, you know, now we're still in that sort of early stage of, we're leaving the pandemic. We have all these really cool tools for an artist to have on their phone in front of them, and now how do we translate that same kind of experience to a big concert experience, right? And so I think we're still figuring out our ways through that, and again, you know, how is the artist going to make money, and you know, how does it's still a good concert experience for the people in attendance. So
Yeah.
I will say that I've done a lot of work in this area. So in the concert area, and the key is for the artist to see someone, so a big screen in front of them where they get to see a lot of people that are there. So putting people in front of them is still important to get the best performance. Although a lot of artists will tell you that they're not really, once they're in front of 1,000 people and there's a bunch of lights, they're not seeing a lot of people anyway. They might hear them, but they're not really seeing them. But we do a lot of R&D. I've spent months doing R&D in this specific area, and you can absolutely get great performances out of the artist with or without a screen in front of them. They're performers and they're performing.
An anonymous attendee asks another question, and this is for all of you. What tech skills are valuable to have in order to work tech in the streaming field? Let's start with you, John.
So when I got started in Webcast many years ago now, I think having a background from a technology perspective helped me kind of bridge a gap that bringing those in to understand just from a pure IT perspective. It's helped me a lot in terms of what I do, for just speaking for myself specifically. So that added that really helped contribute towards me understanding some of the fundamentals outside of just learning tech media in general and learning from others, in the space. So I think having some kind of a technical understanding from a technology, especially when it comes to video over IP, if we're talking about, NDI and certain elements that we're now handling and transporting content through different protocols, having that understanding and being able to do that outside of just, producing an event, right? And having that kind of more stage direction. There's a technology element here that I think, we need to really help support the community to help. And I see a lot of people, giving, different ways to connect and grow and develop their expertise in that space.
Yeah. And what do you think, Dan?
Yeah, I would say, and going back to the tips and tricks on my list, that this plays into that really well, because I used to, and no offense to the A1s out there, I think you're awesome, but A1s for me, a lead audio engineer, was sort of a dime a dozen kind of mentality for me, wrongfully so, in those days where it was like, oh, it's a camera op, there's tons of great people. Now my best friend is the A1, is the lead audio engineer on every show, because understanding all of the delays that have to happen on returns, that have to happen on screens in the room, that have to happen on different mix minus feeds that are going to different teams and Zooms calls, those kind of things, having a really killer A1. And this leads into what I would say in terms of skills. Even if you're not a really techie person, maybe you're a production manager, or you're, someone that's watching this that is not super techie, I would recommend 2 classes that you should go just immerse yourself in. One is go to Audinate and learn about Dante. Just take the beginner class and learn about how audio is transforming into Dante and a digital. There's Maddie and other things, but I think Dante is really, really been a game changer. And the second one is I would go to NewTek and or NDI.tv and learn about NDI, and learn about how instead of putting down a video cable, one of those big thick video cables, that everything is being transmitted over Ethernet and over IP. Those will be some really great skills for you to understand, because those 2 protocols have really been transformative. Would you agree, Alex?
Yeah, I'm not a big NDI guy, but I like copper.
But the concept
makes
right?
me feel, the concepts. Yeah. But copper makes me feel warm and fuzzy. But what I will say is that understanding how to switch a show and understanding audio, I will completely agree with Dan. My audio engineer is the core of everything that I do. They're so complex, especially as we do virtual, where we're bringing in stuff from, we're, to Dan's point, we're taking Zoom ISO, we're pulling everything out, putting it into Dante, feeding it back into an X32, or a Yamaha or whatever we're doing, and then trying to build a show. And we have talkback and comms and all these other things. And so audio is super important. Understanding how to switch a show. I have in front of me, I have a little ATEM Mini Extreme or whatever. So I just cut shows, at my desk, but having a little show that you can, having something that you can start to cut and understand the flow of how to cut those things is important. The internet stuff is important. I will say that for me, encoding, and I have had lots of encoders, largely commoditized at this point. A lot of times for a lot of the stuff I send out links, just put an internet into that and it'll just go. But I will say that understanding how to put together a good show, understanding the flow of a show, and then understanding audio and the basics of video cutting and then lighting, of course. But those are huge pieces, and the only way to learn it is to do it. So go to your church and volunteer, go to a nonprofit and do stuff for them.
Become an AP,
buy some of your
involved. Yep.
Just you're not going to take a class and learn it.
Yeah,
Exactly.
I think I'll jump in real quick and just like to Dan's point, tips and tricks. I think another person I would point out is, from me as a content creator on another level in doing talk shows or chalk talks or whatever, and Alex has done his, and we all have kind of done something. Just having that experience and immersing yourself in the technology, whether it's an ATEM Mini or using a Stream Deck and hot switching and just knowing how to produce a show. The only Strand Ozer, he's got Streaming Media Learning Center. Jan and I talked about that, and he's got some great courses. So I think there's a lot of great material out there to Dan's point, because as somebody asked me from an esports perspective at a major university, how do we train students who are in esports or want to pursue a role in broadcast of some sort when it comes to streaming? What should they be, and I think that's a good question to ask. It's an excellent one. I don't think you have to go crazy. So I think there's a lot of great resources, because a lot of these roles are.
And I'll point you to one that's very near and dear to streaming media, which is streaminglearningcenter.com. So you can go there too. Thank you, Steve Nathans Kelly. 2 quick questions before we go. Let's see, David Paskin, and this is for you, Dan. Talk a little bit about best practices for introducing digital first thinking into faith communities. What are some of the challenges and benefits? Real quick.
Oh man, I'm going to pass it to John on that one, because I don't know.
John, you answer real quick. David Paskin's question.
Wait, the question one more time again. One real quick. What was it?
A digital first thinking in faith-based communities.
Absolutely. There's a lot of things happening in that space right now. A guy named Jeff Reed does the Church Digital podcast. You can subscribe to that.
Why don't you type that into the chat section?
I will do that
for David. Sean Whitaker asked a great question for all of you real quick. Do any of your clients care about carbon savings when doing digital first or virtual only, or are they only focused on solving logistical challenges or looking to increase revenue? Meaning, what's the carbon issue there?
I can just tell you that a lot of climate-oriented nonprofits are looking very closely at carbon impact for events, and by next year, you should probably see them asking for a carbon impact report for every conference. And if you don't do one, they'll do one for you, and it'll be very conservative. And so it's going to greatly impact our industry as we move forward.
And thank you, Sean, for that question. Real quick, Ronnie Dudek. I love Zoom and all that it offers, but I can't help feel like hosting events on it cheapens the final product. Do you feel like hosting events on Zoom takes away from virtual events? I'm going to say no, because we're doing this event on Zoom.
Well, I'll also say that when you start pulling it back out and turning it into a show, and I've got, again, when I build the shows out, they can go to any output. I'm building them on Zoom, but I'm outputting them into Zoom or other places. Zoom. It's really a function of the quality of your cameras and lights and the production that you put into it. Doing it as a vanilla Zoom is hard to make it look as good as it could. Taking advantage of the Zoom is by far way ahead of everybody else when it comes to providing us as producers the technical needs through Zoom ISO and OSC and everything else to produce high quality events.
Exactly.
And we talk about Zoom. We talk about Zoom, but Teams as well is
really
at 720p.
No 1080.
Epiphan Connect. Epiphan Connect is also a great product that also allows you to pull your streams out like Zoom ISO. So check out Epiphan.
Yeah, I would do that. That's a big one. Check out that one. I did it, and Dan's right, because Teams is coming along fairly well. I agree with Zoom, to Alex's point about Zoom, but I think Teams is moving along, and now you can use more reliable technologies to support that event.
And that is, I'm giving you the high sign now. This has been a great conversation with Dan Houze, the indomitable Alex Lindsay, and John Porterfield, who is twice the man that Alex is, because he's 180 and Alex is only 90.
Oh, man.
I'd like to think of myself as more efficient. That's
there you go. Efficiency and codecs and everything else. And we didn't even really get into and low carbon footprint, man.
Exactly.
He's only you only see half of him here. See, look at him. So this was great. And by the way, I want to thank the people in the audience for some really cool questions as well, and very well timed. Obviously, we could have gone on even further, but I can't wait to watch the rewind on this because I think we really got into some good stuff and cooking. And thank you again to Eric and Steve and Bill and the whole crew, because you know, this was just a fun time, and hope to see you guys in real life soon. But this was killer, and Alex's setup is always the best, and he just sounds so great too. So thank you for putting everyone else to shame. It's really cool to be being with all you guys, because you do such great work, and you have such great perspectives, and I think that a year from now we'll have even more really to talk about. So much thanks.
That was terrific, and thank you, Chris, for moderating and asking such great questions. That does wrap things up for day one of Streaming Media Connect. The Amazon gift card winner, who correctly identified Herbie Hancock's Hang Up Your Hangups within seconds of it starting, is Chris Stragus. Chris, keep an eye out on your email at the end of the week. Thanks again to Signiant for sponsoring Streaming Media Connect this week. We'll be back at 10 a.m. Eastern tomorrow morning to talk about just how close we can get to zero latency. See you then.